Hello and welcome back to F1 Isn't Real. I am your host, Ben Wevel, and after 3 days of testing, all I'm left with is a list of questions and a fluorescent green livery-induced gambling addiction. I'm joined today by physics aficionado, McLaren diehard, computer shop employee of the month, and a man who spent his life savings on iRacing, my friend Amesh. V1, how's it going?
Hi Ben, thank you for having me on the show. I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well, thank you. Very much better considering the fact that we're going to be getting into an F1 season this Thursday, actually. What do you think about these Saturday races?
I think it's a good opportunity for F1, change it up a little bit. As much as it's good to keep traditions going with a traditional race on Sunday, I think it's quite nice to have a bit of difference. You know how we had sprint races introduced in 2021. Now we're getting races on Saturday, and I think it's time for a change.
Yeah, speaking of things that may be good or bad for F1's image, have you watched any of the new Drive to Survive season?
I have actually. I've watched a couple of the episodes of Drive to Survive. Obviously started with the episode about Lando Norris, my favorite driver. Um, I think I watched it because I'd like to see a different perspective of Formula One. I came into F1 not having watched DTS. It hadn't actually come out before I'd start watching it. And I think it's a very different take of the sport. Um, Netflix, they sort of take different viewpoints and create some interesting interesting things about F1, which some people see and some people don't. But it's everyone's opinion about what they think of it. I think I prefer to get all the details for myself by watching the races live and hearing the radios live as well.
I personally agree. I think Drive to Survive, I think it's a useful tool, but I think at the end of
Yeah,
the day, it gives a skewed and dramatized idea of what Formula One is. And to be honest,
yeah,
nowadays, with Max so dominant at the front, I think it's sort of nullified the impact of Drive to Survive because it's sort of like all focusing on the midfield to backfield battles. But speaking of Max, let's get down to business. Testing has come and gone. We saw Red Bull absolutely tearing up the field on the first day. We saw their partner team, Racing Bulls, looking strong, and we saw Kick, Stake, I don't know what the fuck their name is, but the on the predictable glory run on the final day. Which team's performance did you think was most representative of that same team's true pace this season?
I think it's hard to say because testing it's always going to be something different that happens in the season. When Mercedes were dominating, they weren't consistent. They weren't always dominating the preseason testing, and they won what was it, 8 championships. So I think as much as it's very probable that Red Bull will be dominating this season, I think there are a few other teams out there which can be competing this year with the likes of Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren. For example, last year we didn't expect Aston Martin to be so strong at the beginning of the season. Maybe another team this year could take that spot.
But the whole what I saw from the Aston Martin phenomenon at the start of the season was you went into testing thinking they weren't going to do well. You came out of testing thinking that they were going to be a contender. So I feel like if we're looking at just last year as a sample size, then, testing could be, maybe in this new generation of Formula One, could be a decent indicator of where people are at. But yeah, to an extent, I agree with you. You got to account for the fact that certain teams might be sandbagging. For example, Red Bull themselves, even though they were going, absolutely crazy with some of their runs, both on race pace and on quali pace, they were really, I think it seemed to individuals that were there that they were sandbagging significantly as well. They were adding lots, very varying fuel loads. And so I think Red Bull probably may be one of the most unpredictable teams going into the season. And that's not where are they? That's how far are they ahead of everybody else. But
Yeah,
speaking of Red Bull, they went in a really different direction this season with the car looking a little bit like last year's Mercedes. But as I say, they were extremely quick on track with that day one lap that just put him put Max 1.1 seconds ahead of the field, despite the fact that he completed the most laps on that day as well with 143. And, people have been throwing around all of these different sort of numbers about where the RB20 is compared to the rest. A couple of sims was saying 5 tenths. The race predicted 4 tenths. Helmut Marko with a predictably sort of conservative 3 tenths gap. So whereabouts do you think Red Bull will be compared to the rest of the field? And also, why do you think they sidestepped with their design this year?
Well, I think Red Bull will definitely be dominating the earlier stages of the season. I think last year they definitely got they play their cards right with their penalty with the wind tunnel. I think they just made a really good design. I think this year they may have found something which no one else has, which is allowing their car to be stronger compared to other cars. Uh, Also, I think with their own Red Bull powertrains engine, I think that really suits the style of car that Adrian Newey has designed. I've read his book, How to Build a Car, and it really seems like the car itself has to work with each other. So the engine has to work with the rest of the aerodynamics, the gearbox, and the shapes of everything. I think Red Bull have definitely found something which every part of the car completely works together like a team. And I think they might they might have something which no other team does at this point in the season. And I think it might take a bit of time for some other teams to catch up on that. We saw that with McLaren last year around the summertime. They exponentially increased their points with consecutive podiums, and I think it's all to play for this year really because we're a couple seasons in to the new regulations. So I think as long as it, it all really depends on who can find what the fastest.
I really agree with you. I think Red Bull have found an advantage and they've got into a vein of form that I don't think has been seen previously in F1. Because even if we're looking back to the sort of dominant ages of old, like Michael Schumacher in the sort of early 2000s with his phenomenal run with the Ferrari team, and obviously the Mercedes run of the mid 2010s, those teams were being at least consistently challenged by, obviously, for example, if we're looking at like Hamilton 2020, that was just, he was unmatched. But there were points in that reign in which, you saw chinks in the armor. So like Ferrari with Seb Vettel was, had he not made the mistakes that he did, could have posed a real threat to Lewis. And obviously with Michael Schumacher, he was battling it out against the McLarens, Kimi Räikkönen, obviously even he was battling with Mika Hakkinen, and Mika Hakkinen won out in that case in the late 90s and early noughties. But with Red Bull, what we're seeing is domination to a different extent, to a different level than we've ever seen before. They've won innumerable races over the past seasons. And the fact that they look to be continuing their momentum is what's really frightening. And do you think that the FIA are going to step in? Do you think there's a point at which the FIA is going to look at this and say, this is damaging our brand? We have to make a change really quickly. Otherwise, this will get out of control and it will be a Red Bull controlled. And even with like the racing bulls just looking so strong in testing, like Red Bull are really taking over F1. Do you think there's going to be some kind of intervention?
Well, I think there's two different questions here, whether they can do something and whether they should do something. I think the last season, a lot of people might have found sort of boring because of Max just winning all the time. And I think it will take a bit of time if for the FIA to be able to do something because they can't do a direct intervention without losing out or without putting a bad name on them. They have to do it in a way which is so indirect it doesn't put them at a disadvantage, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think the only way I could think of which would be able to do that is a new regulation, which would which only gives an opportunity for Red Bull to make a mistake because they could still get it right in the next time. we saw this in 2014 with the turbo hybrid era. You said Seb Vettel was winning all the races in 2013, and then the hybrid engines came along in 2014, and it looked like Mercedes and Hamilton, they just mastered it, which is brilliant for them. Um, and in 2022, we had the new wing regulations with the aero, and didn't really seem to change that much with Max winning because he won the drivers in 2021. But I think we'll probably have to wait a bit for a new major reg change to occur for anything to change, or there could just be some uprise with another team. I'm not quite sure. I don't think the FIA should intervene because I think it makes the sport more natural, and it would be better if another team could come to the top in a more natural, less saturated way.
I would like to agree with you, but I feel like I feel like the 2026 sort of minor regulation changes, which are going to be happening, they've got to make they've I feel like it's sort of make or break for the FIA because this is a point that I made a while ago in a pod back a few months ago. Um, for example, they're trying to corner the American market right now. And the American market has been continually exposed to sports where different people win every year. So MLB, for example, you've had nine different teams winning in the past 11 years. NBA, it's something like eight in the past 10, similar numbers with the NFL. I don't think that F1 can sort of sustain its captivate, I don't think it can continue to captivate the American audience without some level of I guess, nuance at the front. And so, although I would like to think that it's out of the question and that there can be a natural rising of a team, I feel like either the F1's going to make that sacrifice or they're going to make a significant change. But you read that Adrian Newey book. So we've got some regulations coming within the next sort of half decade. There's going to be a major regulations change. From what you've read, how dynamic is he as an engineer?
But I think Adrian Newey definitely has the experience. He's been in the field for 30 years now, and I think when he gets it right, as you can see, it really pays off. Um, After looking at some of the sketches he's done and reading about how he's done what he's done, um, I think it all comes down to just how well the team can put the car together as well, because you can think of an idea, but you definitely need the parts and the team to put it together. And I think that's what Christian Horner has done. He's got the team together and built a car around Max, especially in the last 5 years with Red Bull. I think the car has definitely been built around Max being the first driver. And after hearing the opinions of previous Red Bull drivers, the likes of Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly, I think it's definitely been tuned and been worked on for numerous years. I think that's where the perfections come from. The number of years it's been in progress for. I think that's where the great successes come from in the Red Bull team.
You're talking about Christian Horner there. I think he is one of the cornerstones of the franchise. He's been with Red Bull from the jump, essentially. Um, we have this very difficult situation in Formula One at the moment, where we have one of the most high-profile non-members of the paddock who's not a driver, um, currently in the middle of this extremely tense and divisive investigation into his character. What is it like for a team to have that over? This is a team who's dominated for the past 3 seasons. How difficult is it to sort of remember, do you think, that you're in this position despite having this hanging over your head?
I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but I think um, a team is definitely something